Hello and welcome back to Mr. Excalibur. My name is Arthur. Today we are looking at the Cheness Kaze Katana. This is their standard length katana that uses a 9260 spring steel blade. It's standard length, about 28 or so inches long. This is also a version of their 9260 blade that is differentially heat treated, so it actually has the Hamon line on it is real. One of the things that I want to do with this sword is a little bit different, unfortunately, today, and that is when I first got this, and you'll see this later on, was this whole situation. Yeah, I'm just going to get right to it. The saya came somewhat defective. I've already called up SwordBuyersGuide where I got this to see if I was going to get a full refund. At the time this video is being made, I haven't gotten a response yet, although they are looking into it. But I decided to make this video anyway, mainly because of a couple things. One was some responses that I got to the first Cheness sword I ever made. That one was the Novath. That was the one that had a 30-inch blade. It had a bohie down the back, very, very different model. But the response that I got from a particular reviewer was that apparently I did not read the fine print, which actually turned out to be not so fine, and that was my bad. And essentially what I didn't read was that Cheness actually lists all the different things that could possibly go wrong with their swords. And as I'm talking here, that list is going to start scrolling up and down here as I kind of step to the side and as I talk a little bit about it. One of the things that was mentioned were various issues with the saya, the blade, all these different, possible maladies that could actually happen with the with their swords, and apparently that is used as a bit of a basis for why, if any of those things should happen, you can't return their swords. If any of those possible, what would you say, possible failings on the manufacturing process, if any of those things happen to, any of those faults happen to appear. And what's interesting is that all of these are the various things that we know as reviewers can happen to mass-produced katanas. Things like problems with the saya, loose fittings, the Ito wrap isn't all that tight, all the various issues that you've heard probably if you've seen any of these reviews either by myself or some of the other people that have done a lot of these that are out there. I'll credit Matthew Jensen here with doing a lot of katanas. These are kind of the high points that we often hit when looking at issues with these mass-produced katanas. So it's interesting that Cheness actually says, hey, you know what, we admitted, we understand that all these different things can happen, and if any of those things happen, yeah, you can't return our swords because of them. I find that particularly interesting. So I'm going to step back into the camera here. What I'm going to be doing with this is actually showing some footage of some people that have had various issues with this particular model, and also some footage from Adam Novath, who, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who kind of ran on a bit of a tear about all the different issues with Cheness swords. The footage he released was a little bit old, but what's interesting is here we are some years later, and as it turns out, a lot of the issues that he had were right here. And I actually decided to run this as a test. I had kind of chalked up my first experience to possibly just being, you know, one-off or one that wasn't that bad, and so I decided, okay, let's get another one and really see if that is the case. And as it turns out, a lot of the issues that people had with Cheness were made manifest in this one right here. But we're going to do the kind of some of the normal things, and that is first looking at the unboxing, and then we're looking at some of, you know, other people's experiences with it. Not all of them very good, and then we'll get into some stats and some wrap up with me at the end, just kind of showing. I did not do any cutting with this, mainly because it's my intention to actually return this at some point. So we'll see how that pans out. I'll probably have to end up updating you guys in the comments section to actually tell you how this all panned out, because I decided to make this video right away, and just to show kind of the condition of what I got right out of the box, and just kind of go through it based upon that initial impression. Yes, of course, you know, mass-produced swords, there's issues with them, but Cheness at least seems to exemplify not just 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the, you know, various failings some of these mass-produced katanas have, but it seems to exemplify a whole bunch of them, unfortunately. And yet it seems as though they keep on pumping them out. So let's take a look at all that footage, and then we'll wrap it up here at the end.
So here we are looking at the unboxing of the Cheness Kaze Katana, and as the same with last time when I got a Cheness sword. It comes with a very simple outer box, and then inside is a very fancy gift box. This has the nice latches on the outside, the nice silk inner lining, the formed fitting inserts, so on and so forth. It had some packets in it to keep the inside dry, so on and so forth. Now I will repeat the same reservation that I have with these boxes that I mentioned back then in similar cases. Whenever I see a sword that's going for around only about $300-ish, and I see this big box, my first instance is to say, you know what, I didn't buy a nice gift box, I bought a sword. When you see the advertisement for it, it doesn't say, and by the way, it comes with a nice gift box. It says you have the sword, you have the saya, and that's it. So I always get a little leery whenever I see that, and that has not changed. When I first got the sword out of the box, it actually felt pretty nice. It was oiled with a very thick, white, viscous substance. It was not the same as the kind of the waxy substance that I got on the last one. But this one came with something else in it, and again, I don't care what it is, wax, white, whatever it is. This is the only company that I've ever seen that uses this kind of stuff when they keep these swords lubricated on their way over here from China. So here's some up close about it. Now they say that, you know, the aesthetics on these swords are very basic, and for some people even boring. I have to say that on this one that I got, I actually liked it. I didn't mind the aesthetics being a little on the bland side. They had a little bit of character to them. They might be generic. You might be able to find those fittings on other swords. In fact, I'm perfectly willing to admit that. But on this one, they looked all right. It was all right. The saya on the outside seemed pretty nice. The hamon line, as advertised on this sword, was very subtle. I did not like how they ground the kasake tip. It really just looks like someone just stuck the end of the thing into a screwdriver and grind and, you know, scratched it on. I really didn't care for that much. If you're not going to really bother, you know, do a nice grind for the kasake, don't bother with it. Just polish it all the way to the end of the tip and don't bother with it. Now here is a big issue. I am literally sawing that into the same piece of paper you've probably seen me use on all kinds of different demos, and it just wouldn't cut through it worth anything. This was the first indication with this sword that it was displaying some of the same issues that people have complained about Cheness over and over again, is that it is as dull could be. I literally had to push it through. Now along the very edge it did have some sharpness to it, and so I mean, other than that, it started to, it felt actually pretty nice. It was a little weighty, and I can understand why people complain about that. The side didn't fit exactly right, but you know, everything kind of looked okay. Two hours later, after getting the sword, I was just seeing how it moved in and out of the scabbard, and this happened. A piece of the black outer coating broke off and revealed inside a side that was severely cracked. You can see me just being able to just spread it there just a little bit with my fingers, and you can see how severe it is and how they try to make up for it by putting all kinds of gobbledygook in there to try and seal it up. This was a major problem. This was a big oops. This is something that, you know, I don't think really is covered in their list of things that, oh, by the way, could happen. I don't know what kind of material that was that they've got covering it. I don't know if there was the lacquer that literally just broke off in one big chunk or what that stuff was. But this was, again, one big strike too, as far as my experience here with Cheness. This next section is going to be looking at several other people's experience with the Cheness Kaze Katana, with the exception of one person who actually chose the slightly shorter Ko Katana version of this sword. And this guy, you know, he's just, you know, whacking away at water bottles in his backyard, and by the way, you know, decides to take out the stand too. You'll notice that with these bottles, as he's hitting them, they're not really, you know, getting clean cut, and that's probably because he's got the same problem that I do, and that is the thing just is not that sharp. Well, that one he did clean the top off of. That was actually pretty good. So who knows if he really sharpened it or not, but you know, there it is, kind of the backyard cutter. This guy had a really different experience. He got one of these. This is the same one, and he was cutting these cardboard tubes in his backyard, which, by the way, actually are pretty nice test subjects for, you know, kind of backyard kind of cutting. If you cut them just right and you leave them standing, it's a pretty good, you know, indication of edge alignment. And see, his right there at the edge apparently did cut sort of well, kind of a jagged cut. But then, you know, he decides to take another whack at something, and this happens. Now, this isn't listed anywhere else. Watch this, guys. So he winds up, making sure everybody's watching, and bing! Oh, look at that. The edge of my sword broke off. Now, this guy later did a video on how that possibly could happen. I don't think he really came into any kind of definitive conclusion, and I don't know if Cheness gave him his money back, but obviously that was some kind of defect of some kind. I would not think that that is something typical. Now, our friend Tack here had an experience with Cheness that unfortunately is listed in one of those many things that can happen. Throughout the beginning of his video, he went through kind of the aesthetics of the sword, how he actually liked it. Same as I did. I kind of liked it. But then he kind of did a little life hack in trying to see how straight the sword is. And his demo here shows it being clearly off and crooked. Now, unfortunately, this is one of those things that Cheness claims in their I guess you could say, disclosures that they're saying, oh, by the way, yeah, in the process of, you know, heat treating this very hard to deal with material, 9260 steel, yeah, every once in a while it comes out warped and bent. Well, TAC here decided to actually take issue with that and go to the company and see if they would give him a new one or anything. Apparently, they did not respond to him virtually at all. So this wasn't a case of bad or good customer service. This was a case of no customer service. So that's another really big strike against this company. And again, that model, by the way, was the Kaze Katana, which is a slightly shorter version of the one I got. Now, this gentleman, just kind of doing some backyard stuff. I wanted to at least show that, you know, it can do some backyard cutting. Both this guy and the previous person that I showed doing some backyard cutting, I don't know if they sharpened these after they got them, but they do show them, you know, going through the plastic bottles and you know, being able to do that. So he does a nice wind up and goes through a few plastic bottles, and it seems to be okay for doing something like that. Now, according to Cheness, you know, sometimes the swords come better sharpened than others. It's just kind of luck of the draw, I suppose, as whether or not you get one that is sufficiently sharp. It's just been noted enough times by enough people that sharpness is an issue. So maybe this guy sharpened it, maybe not. Now this next little bit of footage, it actually comes from the Sword Buyer's Guide. This is their owner, I believe, who is demonstrating what can be done with these Cheness swords. Primarily, he's trying to show the, I guess the value of the 9260 blades that they've got. Now again, there's no information here showing, saying whether or not he sharpened this further than what he got it directly from Cheness as. He then hands it off to a friend of his who doesn't have hardly any training at all, and he's even able to cut mats. I suspect this sword probably has been sharpened some post getting it. Darth Tony here showed a couple clips from people out of school. Now these are beginners. The comment, I believe, and I may get this wrong, if I do, I do apologize, but the information was that in fact these are beginner students and they were testing out the Kaze Katana, and I didn't put all their experiences because this video was about, I don't know, about 10-15 minutes long, so I didn't want to flood this with too much of these experiences. But overall, their experience was it needed to be sharpened, and when they got it, it was excessively dull. That was the aspect that they focused on here, and there is a good example of just what it doesn't do. Now, admittedly, these are beginners. They're still working on edge alignment and how good their cuts are. But even the guy who did this video, he even admits, you know, even after sharpening it a bit, it still just did not perform. And I believe this is our guy here who did some cutting. Some of it on the tatami mats did all right. However, a lot of his comments were, and a lot of the other students in this video were, that the cutting ability of the sword was severely lacking. And, you know, it had a lot of weight at the tip, so much so that, you know, it really kind of hampered the ability to train with it. I encourage you to look at that video. It had quite a few interesting experiences, but all of them basically summed up to that. All right, here is Adam Novath, and I'm going to let him speak for himself.
China's swords swords, number one, are supposed to be designed by martial artists for martial artists. But in reality, they are actually, number one, they're poorly balanced. So if you have a carbon steel Iaido, for example, it's going to be way too end heavy. You can actually get, even for that price tag, a better deal buying it someplace. The point of balance. The next problem is the ska. The ska is on their way too tight, to the point that I think that when they put them together, they probably take, and if it's too tight, too tight, take a rubber mallet and smack it on until it goes on. Because it seems like most of the Cheness swords that I've handled have cracked skas. And, you know, that's really the only way possible for that to happen on a sword that's never been used, is if the ska was too tight and basically just next problem. The saya finish is not great on these. It's just not. It dings easily, it nicks easily, it's just not a very great finish. On the glossy black ones, now if you get one of the speckle finish ones, it's actually pretty durable. But that's a finish that's pretty much always durable. You know, I haven't really seen many saya with a speckle finish that doesn't take.
Now at this point, he simply just goes on into a bit of a rant. I can't say that I blame him, on the different aesthetics of the sword just kind of being very, very blah, boring. And you know what, that isn't something that I necessarily harp on, but then he also goes on and compares it with some Hanwei products, and he talks about the different parts of the saya not being very sturdy. He talks about the other aesthetics of the sword just really not being to his liking. But his main points were that the sword is not engineered properly and the handles aren't done properly. I can't really attest for the handles because I didn't take mine apart, but you know, this video, just so you guys know, was only done in 2019, so his information, this was a pretty recent video, at least according to YouTube. I mentioned that I was not going to be doing any cutting with this, and that is because currently, even at the time of this additional narration recording, I am still working out the possibility of exchanging the sword. I'm not really interested in getting another one. I'm just trying to get my money back. So I'll let you know how that goes. As you guys can see there's again the issue with the saya, and that whole part right at the top there that simply just cracked off, revealing some even more serious problems inside the saya. Another interesting problem with the saya, as I may have mentioned during the unboxing, is that the sword does not fit in it. Now, Cheness lists those as possible problems that come with it. And you know what? I can understand if the saya is too loose. There are shims and different things that you can put inside. Hanwei actually gives you a whole bunch of literature with their swords showing you how you can do this, and that's fine. The problem is if the saya is too tight and it's actually cracking because it's not the channel inside isn't big enough for the blade that it's supposed to go with, there's nothing you can do about that. I mean, you can go in and you can crack the thing open, I suppose, and try and redo the channel and, you know, recut it, but by that time you've basically just made yourself a new saya, so what's the point? So it's an interesting conundrum that Cheness leaves you with when they say, oh yeah, these are some issues that might happen, but you know what, by disclosing that right up front, I'm not really sure what to make of it. Is that just poor salesmanship? Is that brutal honesty? Or are they literally trying to say, look, if you want anything better than this, you go shopping somewhere else? Because quite honestly, you know, you're going to not have to look very far to find something that that is going to work a lot better with better fittings, a better saya, and I'm going to get into that later. I might as well just, you know, put that out there right now. Now, as far as how the sword itself, by itself, handled, I can't really say that it wasn't that bad. The Edo wrap actually was soft. It wasn't that on there so hard that the knots actually bite into your hand. Sometimes that's kind of the two-edged problem of having the Edo wrap on there super tight. Yeah, the knots don't move, but at the same time, they're on there so tight it'll actually bite into your hands. This one, what they did was the Edo wrap looked very well, I guess you could almost say conditioned, and it was nice, and it felt really nice in the hand. Now, a lot of complaints have been that the blades are heavy, and I will admit, for a standard length katana, this katana was heavy. And I have mentioned that before, and even Cheness lists that as a possible difference between their swords and others. Now, I don't know how that is really a benefit to beginners, outside of the whole kind of baseball bat theory of, you know, you put weights at the end of the bat and it makes your sword arm stronger, and so by the time you get to something a little nicer, your sword arm is a lot stronger and the blades feel a lot lighter. So not really sure about how that philosophy really fits in.
My intention with this video was to almost go kind of down a checklist of all the various issues that people have found with Cheness and see if I could just buy a model brand new. I bought this with my own money. By the way, you know, just as kind of a disclaimer, I know it's a little late in the video, but I don't represent Cheness. I don't represent Sword Buyer's Guide. I don't represent any of those companies. I will admit having a bit of a bias against Cheness because of my first experience, but I did really want to go into this with my eyes wide open and to get just a blank slate by buying a brand new model and just seeing what I got. And this is brand new. This isn't secondhand. This isn't used. This is straight from a licensed distributor. So I wanted to see what we got. This particular Cheness goes for around $300. I'm going to say plus or minus. And so it puts it in that ballpark that a lot of swords that I've been looking at. And what I can't help but do is to compare this with a similar size sword at a similar price and made of, I wouldn't say a similar material, but definitely, you know, a similar style. And so what I've got here, also kind of off camera, is an example of a Iron Tiger forge, something that I did a previous video on. Someone made a comment in a previous video that I made on Cheness going, well, you know, you're not going to find a sword that has, you know, nicer aesthetics at the same price that's going to take the same kind of beating. I disagree. I found a sword that has cut very well, and this is, you know, something that a beginner could actually afford and use, and I don't think should be too, you know, afraid of beating around. So let's take a look at, you know, that one. This is the one that we're comparing it to, and one of the things that I wanted to point out was that it has a T10 blade. Now, for some people, they're saying, okay, that's a more fragile blade. You might not want to give it to a beginner. I'm a beginner, and quite honestly, the blade performed and felt a lot better balanced than this thing. This came to me not only very tip heavy, which is something else that a lot of people have said about Cheness, but also it came dull. As you guys saw, it took forever just to cut through paper. Like I said, I didn't do any additional cutting on this, mainly because of its current status. But you know, you compare that to how this did. It's got a better polish on it. It has a nice defined hamon line. The aesthetics on the saya are really nice. This saya also, like the one from Cheness, does not necessarily have horn right here on the throat of the saya. I gotta remember what that Japanese name for that is. But you know what? It's a lot better fit, and you know, doesn't necessarily fall out, but at the same time, yeah, really nice fit. Definition, I mean, the aesthetics on the sword are a lot better. I even had someone who pointed out the fact that the habaki looked kind of cattywampus in how it fit on the sword compared to some of the other ones that I had. So here's one. This is one goes for approximately the exact same amount. It's about the same size, same blade geometry, slightly different material on the blade, better aesthetics, and you know, this is just kind of a, to me, kind of a black and white example of something better for your money that I happen to have on hand right now. So if this seems like a bit of a rant against Cheness, I suppose it kind of is. I really kind of went, you know, quite a few rounds with a fellow reviewer and commentator, someone who commented on the last video about the fact that I was expecting either too much or I held it to a higher standard because Cheness was so upfront about saying, hey, these are all the things that can be wrong with this sword. You should have known better. Why were you surprised at, you know, A, B, and C? And my response to that, I guess, is, for the record, just because a company lists all the things that could go wrong doesn't mean that they should go wrong. For exactly the same price, you can have a sword. And you know what? I'll even say that, you know, I actually liked the aesthetics on this one. The Tsuba and the combination of the various fittings actually were very nice. Everything was tight. The Ito wrap actually was pretty comfortable, but the blade was not as well balanced as others I've seen. I mean, look at this. This is ridiculous. I mean, it's just funny to me, I guess, that that they would say that that's okay, just as long as you know what you're getting. Now, I will say that their 9260 blades are known for being able to take a beating, and you know what? Perhaps, and I will give this, and that is perhaps for that reason alone, you know, these swords may be worth your money if that's really all you are interested in, is just a blade that's going to take an absolute beating regardless of, you know, what you smash it against. And in that case, you know, 9260 blades are known for, be able to really dish out quite a bit of punishment. But I'm a little bit more of an out-of-the-box kind of person, meaning I want to see what this comes to me like out of the box compared to other swords that are around the same price range out of the box. And in that regard, you can do, I think, quite a bit better than Cheness. And in fact, Cheness as a company overall, I think really has kind of backed themselves into a bit of a corner by posting either on a distributor's website like Sword Buyer's Guide or even their own website saying, hey, you know what, here are all the things that could possibly be wrong, or the possible malfunctions or conditions your sword could come in. We're not an art sword company. We're not trying to make these into art. We're trying to make these into functional pieces. And it's like, okay, that's nice that you're being upfront and telling me that. To me, even as an amateur collector and even more of an amateur user, that's not a very good selling point. So this was a test to see just what I'd get after having gotten the first one, and then kind of reading up on all the different issues that people have with them. And I can say pretty succinctly that I saw quite a few of those issues. I saw a saya that is, in my opinion, less than worthless. I've gotten sayas from other companies that were in better condition that I also rated as something that you probably could spend your money better on elsewhere. The overall feel of the sword compared to others is heavy. It's not overly heavy to where it's prohibitive, but if you're going to be a real nitpicker about it, yeah, the blades are extremely heavy compared to others that have exactly the same dimensions and exactly the same blade geometry. So yeah, strike 2 for Cheness. I'll let you guys know as to whether or not I was able to actually return this. I hope this has been informative. I know it probably came off as a bit of a bias against this particular company, and you know what, if it does, we all have our biases, and mine was definitely dictated by my experiences. So again, I hope it's been informative for you when looking to see whether or not you want to get one of these. Please comment. I'm really interested in what people have to say about all this. For those of you that did all the videos that I took clips from, I appreciate it, and I hope you guys can appreciate me putting them all together kind of in one place, so we get kind of really consensus on not only this particular product but also this company and how they decide to do things. So that's something that you might want to consider before getting one of these. So bye for now.